By viewers like you. It's not just storytelling, it's real life. PBS Hawaiʻi, home is here.
Local broadcasts of Insights on PBS Hawaiʻi are made possible by the support of viewers like you. Mahalo, and by Karl Smith Ball, providing legal services throughout Hawaii and the Pacific since 1857, making a positive difference in the communities where we live and work. This year, Hawaii lawmakers passed new legislation aimed at improving safety for young riders, requiring helmets for anyone under the age of 18 on skateboards and mopeds. But will these new rules make our streets safer? And how will they be enforced? Join us as we break down what these new laws mean for families, riders, and drivers across the state. Don't miss the conversation. Next on Insights.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaiʻi. I'm Darrell Huff. This year, state lawmakers passed legislation regarding safety rules for young skateboard and moped riders. For skateboarders, all riders under the age of 18 are now required to wear a helmet. All moped riders are now required to wear a helmet, and the minimum age for driving a moped is now 16. So what does that mean for riders across the state, and how will these new safety measures be enforced? We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email or call in your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and the PBS Hawaiʻi YouTube page. Now to our guests. Senator Karl Rhoads represents Senate District 13, which extends from Nu'uanu to Iwilei and to downtown. He assumed office in 2016 and introduced Senate Bill 30 regarding moped safety. He is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee and played basketball at the University of London. Robert Sato is the co-founder and general manager of Moped Doctors in Honolulu. As a moped activist, he's been involved in the moped safety inspection program and helped the Department of Transportation develop and finalize noise standards. And Garrett Hall is the state trauma program manager and acting chief of the Emergency Medical Services and Injury Prevention System branch at the Department of Health. He is a registered nurse and has a master's degree in biomedical informatics. He is the board member of the American Trauma Society. Let me start with Senator Rhoads. What were you thinking in pushing this bill? What was the main goal you were after?
Well, okay, so I didn't actually introduce SB 30. I introduced SB 344, which is the one on
but they're all laws now.
So they're both laws now.
Okay.
What we were driving at was a constituent of mine who's involved in physical therapy industry or profession asked me to introduce it, and I agreed. And the reason for it was because helmets across the board, pretty much in any situation, reduce brain injuries significantly. And so it was a safety measure, and both these bills will make our streets and riders safer.
Robert Sato, do you feel like these laws are appropriate for the way people ride mopeds especially?
That's a sweeping generalization, Darrell. It's difficult to give you a one-point answer on that. What really happens is the number one thing that you can use in terms of your own safety, in terms of driving, whether it's a car, or moped, or bicycle, or e-bicycle, or whatever, even as a pedestrian, is situational awareness. That's the number one thing. A helmet has been proven to drop the number of brain injuries. That is correct. However, it's not as simple as that in a lot of situations. There's a lot of variables involved, and there's a few things that you might want to consider, like state of Hawaii. We are known for having mopeds in the state of Hawaii. The weather is great year-round. Oahu is very, very small and compact, so from one end of the island is 37 miles. A moped can get 100 miles a gallon, so you can commute technically from one end of the island to the other. You save tons of money on parking. However,
before you start getting to a lot of statistics, I want to give Garrett a chance, and then we're going to go back through all this stuff.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, so Garrett Hall, how important and how much difference do you think this will make to the quality of life of people and all people of Hawaii?
So from an injury prevention standpoint, and just from a utilization of our emergency medical services system as a whole, it's very important. We see about 600 last year, moped injuries alone, without helmets involved and resulting in a 911 call. We know that those injuries themselves impact healthcare as a whole and the ability to sustain those individuals first. Within the state of Hawaii, we only have neurosurgeons on 2 islands. So helmets are really important, understanding just your situation and situational awareness. I agree, that's super important, but also understanding what services do you have available in your community.
And I'm going to stop you there too, because I want to get to a video that we have of that I'm going to introduce in a second. But right now what I want to say is that just to clarify what has changed in terms of the law, the biggest change from what I'm hearing is that all moped riders were going to have to wear helmets. That's a pretty dramatic change, so we'll make sure we talk quite a bit about that during this show. When it comes to skateboards, what we've done is skateboard riders didn't have to wear a helmet before, but now anyone under 18 has to wear a helmet, which is also significant.
That's correct, on public property.
On public, private, well, most places they go as public, private, sidewalks, parks, so on. So anyway, let's go to skateboard riders now and hear what they have to say about the idea of wearing helmets.
My first thought would be, like, I feel like there's a lot of other things that need to be policing on that's, like, taking kind of, like, the energy away from, like, just kind of over-policing petty things. I don't know exactly what the penalty is. I'd assume just, like, a fine, but it's just, I don't know. I mean, it goes back to the same thing that there's other more important things to be focusing on. You don't need cops, like, making their rounds to skate parks or pulling over skaters going down the street kind of thing.
I think it's unnecessary. That's what I think. There's plenty of other more pressing issues on the island. I think most of the time, if they know what they're getting into and they know it's dangerous, what they're about to do, they should probably wear a helmet. But most of the time, I mean, we're just skating to the store, you know, just going to get a Coca-Cola or something, you know, or Pepsi.
My name's Juliana. I'm from Florida, Palm Bay. I'm 11. If it's not like dangerous activity, then you shouldn't be having to wear like a helmet. Yeah, just like roll around, go down ramps and ollies and stuff. It's not that dangerous. I've never hit my head. I think if the parents want you to wear a helmet, then you should, but if they don't care, then you don't have to.
I feel like some skaters are really against helmets. I'm not against helmets, but it's like a personal choice at the end of the day. They definitely serve a good purpose. Like skating, I've hit my head before. I think plenty of other skaters have, and like they definitely can protect you from it, but it's like a personal choice. Like sometimes I'll wear a helmet, but usually if I'm just cruising, I'm not wearing one.
Okay, so while we were watching the video, we got our first question for Senator Rhoads from Gordon in Palolo Valley. Why is it such a concern now for skateboarders to wear helmets as it wasn't in the past? What new information did you get that made you interested in supporting
Well,
that?
I've actually introduced the bill several years in a row, so in this case it's just because bills don't usually pass the first time, no matter how good the idea is. I mean, you can make that criticism of any bill we passed. You know, why did you pass it this year when this problem's been around forever? So it was, you know, it's something I have been interested in for a while. Yeah, I mean, there's always a tension between personal freedom and the state saying you need to do things to protect yourself. And I'm old enough to remember when we debated safety belts in cars. Well, now everybody's pretty much down with that, but it wasn't that way 40 years ago, and people were arguing that, no, we don't really need to do it, it's your personal choice. But
Well, your district also is downtown. And do you see a lot of dangerous skateboard behavior down there?
I don't know if we see any more than anybody else. I mean, one part of your clip was at Ala Park, which is a popular skate park in the district I represent. But I don't think it's I don't view it as a district specific problem.
Garrett Hall, so what can you tell us about injuries to skateboarders, especially head injuries?
Yes, so injuries, so traumatic brain injuries and TBIs for skateboarders, so skateboarding incidents, they're 8 times more likely according to the Journal of American Medicine Association and their publications. And from peer-reviewed literature, that when you go out and do the research, we know when we look through the traumatic injury data that they're 8 times more likely to suffer a severe traumatic brain injury.
8 times more likely than what?
Than the average risk-taking behavior within the trauma realm. So that could be car crashes, that will be anything from bicycle riding to falls,
So
which
it's
we
a
know.
high likelihood of injuring your head on a skateboard.
Correct. So when we look at trauma as a whole, we know that they're 8 times more likely to have a severe traumatic brain injury when they are on a skateboard.
And so, but statistically, do we have a lot of kids that come in here in Hawaii with injuries like that?
And I will say, yes, it's relative, right? So from 2024, January of 2024 to current date, there were 40 skateboarding injuries, and 50% of those had a severe TBI.
And a quick one for Senator Rhoads. Did the skateboard community support the helmet law as it was going through the legislative session? Bob and Makiki, did you even hear from any skateboarders during the session?
I'd have to look it up. I don't believe there was a huge outcry, but the committee that heard the bill initially, where you'd have all those people coming out, was transportation, which I don't sit on.
Okay.
I do want to make a point really fast, though. So when I said 40, that was 40 transported by EMS. So there are skateboarders, too, that arrive at hospitals, so that are not included in my number, that arrive by parents, too, that have severe TBI. So the data that I'm pulling here is from the emergency medical 911 response system.
Okay, so now let's shift down to the helmets for moped. And Robert Sato, you indicated you didn't support this legislation. Why is that, and what are the problems that might be associated with having a law like this?
First of all, there was another bill that was introduced by somebody in the state legislature. They actually wanted to create a bill. I don't remember if it was whether it was the House of Representatives or the Senate, but they had another bill which they wanted to make it so that anybody of any age that rides any two-wheeled vehicle, e-bike, motorcycle, scooter, moped, doesn't matter, would have to wear a helmet. And when that bill came out, I was figuring, why is this lesser bill even in existence? Because that other bill would take precedence over it. However, that bill got changed and didn't become law. So to me, instead of raising the age to 18, say to 21, we all know that people in a certain age group tend to have more injuries than other people in other age groups. 70 or 80-year-olds much less likely to have an injury on a moped in terms of TBI than a person who's 18 to 21. There's a reason why car insurance rental companies won't lend, you have to be 25 to rent a car. So there's a proven track record that maybe they overreached and that they should have implemented a raise to, say, it used to be 18, the maximum age of helmets. They should have raised it to 21 or something like that instead of doing everybody at one time.
Okay, so so I understand your point. You're basically saying that it makes sense to have an age-specific law, and it doesn't make sense to not have a law that also affects these electric bikes and the electric vehicles. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that I believe that they overreached and went too far in terms of targeting everybody who rides a moped. Okay? Not everybody who rides a moped is going to have an accident. Now, Garrett, right? Garrett brought up some statistics on how many injuries a year did you say?
We're talking about mopeds?
Mopeds?
That's in Hawaii?
Yeah, so last year these are just moped injuries that resulted in EMS unit being dispatched. There were approximately 596.
Okay.
So let me make sure we understand these statistics, because we're going to start talking about that. Is it 600 injuries involving mopeds that involved the ambulance?
Correct.
And of those, do we have a breakdown on whether they were head injuries?
Yes, so
okay,
yeah, we
go
do.
ahead.
So about 25% of them were head injuries alone, isolated head injuries. And then another 37% are what we would call polytrauma. So that's both head and some sort of limb or other injury involved, and that's 37%. So over 50% of those individuals
of the
responded
600,
correct, had a traumatic brain injury.
I thought you said 37%.
So 30% isolated. So just isolated head injury all alone. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, that's quite a few injuries. That's true. Average of less than 2 a day. But I'd like to bring up some statistics from the state of Hawaii. I checked with the Department of Transportation on statistics on traffic fatalities. And we have here, I don't know if the camera could zoom in on it.
We cannot use your paper.
But the thing is that from January 1st through July 9th, there were a total of 71 deaths, traffic fatalities of all causes, including pedestrians, motorcycles, what have you. Mopeds were 0. January 1st, 2024 through July 2024, also 0. 2023 was also 0. So yes, we do have injuries, but there has been no fatalities in the last 2 years, maybe 3, if you, depending on where you cut it off, for mopeds.
Okay, let me give Senator Rhoads, do you want to respond to that?
Well, it's part of the reason, of course, is that mopeds just don't go as fast. So the whole question of which hazards the government's going to address and which ones they aren't is a perfectly legitimate one. And yes, I would say probably, if you look at the stats, it probably makes, it doesn't mean that it doesn't make sense to have helmets for mopeds, but it makes more sense to have helmets universally required for motorcycles because they go so much faster, and when they have a collision, you have really bad collisions. That's not the way things have worked out at the legislature, but you know, looking at the stats, I think that's would be a fair criticism.
Do you think that that's going to be next? Is it help to have, you have this rule for mopeds and now maybe it's easier to get it on motorcycles from a political step-by-step?
I have no idea. I think the
You're a politician, you know how this works.
The motorcyclists have been very well organized over the years, and usually, fortunately or unfortunately, it's the organized interests that do the best at the legislature. I'm not sure why they don't want to use helmets, because you know, you're going 60 miles an hour with nothing around you, basically. You know, you're asking for trouble. So I don't quite understand it myself. Maybe I'm just timid, but there's bad stats on motorcycles.
I think that's an important context, because I think people need to understand when they involve themselves in that risk-taking behavior of riding any vehicle where they're not surrounded or protected and need a helmet. Like I was going to get back to, we only have neurosurgeons on Oahu and Maui. So if you suffer one of these injuries on any of the outer islands, you are now dependent on air medical transport to get you to a neurosurgeon or to get you to even a location that can assist you with recovery from a severe TBI. And we know the longer that you go without getting care or getting seen, say at a level 1 trauma center or a center that has neurosurgical capabilities, the worse the outcomes are going to be. And so that's a big concern, and we want everyone to understand that when you involve yourself in these behaviors, you're putting yourself at a big risk, where we know right now the severe TBI responses, it's approximately 60% mortality in the state of Hawaii.
Let me give Robert Sato another chance to explain his concerns about this law. In particular, you did bring some samples with you of, you know, so let's say we succeed in getting everyone to wear helmets, which already is sort of a big assumption to start with, and say we reduce these accidents by 50%. Is it worth to you that savings, given the hassle, expense, and trouble of having this law extended to all the riders? And that's why I was wondering if you wouldn't mind showing us these helmets, how much they cost, do they work, that kind of stuff.
Okay, I'm going to be frank about this. Senator Rhoads was addressing the motorcycle lobby. They do have a lobby. So the thing is that when you have a group of people, and almost every fatality, the motorcycle groups, they've had 19 deaths since January, 11 deaths in 2024 from January to July. So they have way more deaths than the mopeds do. Yes, and he's right. They go fast, they're powerful. You can go 120 miles an hour on a motorcycle illegally. Okay, a moped's limited to 30 miles an hour. Okay, but the thing is, that makes it contradictory, hypocritical, and unfair, in my view, as a moped advocate, to see that a much higher group of people who are much more at risk and much more likely to be splattered all over the street than a moped is going 30 miles an hour are allowed to not have helmets, whereas this group of people who are not very popular in terms of being supported by the community because of those moped people who are trying to just get by, because this is one of the few remaining forms of affordable transportation where you can maintain personal sovereignty and independence and movement, they're being targeted They're not being supported, yet these motorcycle riders are allowed to get away with it. And that makes it a very, very difficult pill to swallow, because we feel like we are kind of being pressured and kind of being targeted as an easier target than these other people who are more organized. Whereas most of the moped riders are just trying to get by.
Let him answer that.
I would say that if you're being protected by the government and we're not protecting somebody else, you should be grateful that the government is protecting you, and we're leaving somebody else unprotected. Why they want to be unprotected is beyond me, but they're the ones who are going to die. You're the ones who are now covered by a law that will prevent deaths and injuries. So I don't see that as doing you a disfavor.
I don't see that. The thing is that you have a larger group of people with far greater fatalities than mopeds being addressed. So you can make your point, Senator Rhoads, and I understand your point of view.
I don't really disagree with you in terms of the motorcycles.
I don't think anybody disagrees about that.
I don't see that we're not targeting you. We should be,
no, but
we should be doing other things too.
There is a concern in the moped community that they're constantly being viewed as targets by political elements that don't like our mopeds for whatever reason. Because
not for me anyway. I'm all for mopeds. They get great gas mileage. Some of them are loud. I don't like the two-stroke ones because they wake up half my neighborhood in the middle of the night.
I'm a safety inspector, and I ban those people from the roads.
That's great. But as a matter of a transportation alternative, I think it's great.
Okay, so we agree on that matter.
We certainly agree on that.
Yeah, I think that what you've got here is agreement among three people that we should do this for motorcycles, but politically it's difficult. I want to move on to another issue that is being raised by our viewers. By a couple folks. Esther, did law enforcement agencies across the state support either or both of these laws? And two, from Eric and Kailua, and these are both obviously questions for you, Senator, did either of these laws provide additional resources to law enforcement to help with enforcement? You know, that's one thing. What's the penalty, by the way? That was the third question.
It's the same as it's in the traffic code. So whatever the penalties are there, I'm quite sure that it's just a fine for both of them.
A moving violation, though. I don't think we do that anymore.
I don't think so. I don't remember for sure, but it's in the traffic code.
You watch the law very carefully for mopeds. You don't remember what the penalty is for if they don't wear a helmet?
I believe they have fines.
Just fines, okay.
And it depends, because not too many people get pulled over for that, because that wasn't a law for people over 18.
Right, it'd be a whole new thing.
So it's a whole new thing, exactly. So the problem with this law is not the implementation of the law itself, because there's been a lot of anti-moped laws that have been introduced, like trying to ban the sale of gas-powered mopeds for the last 3 or 4 years, which we fought and defeated.
Anyway. Yeah.
But no, that's not the point. The point I'm trying to make is that HPD themselves are short 20 to 25% manpower. And I've actually talked to another legislator, one of Mr. Rhoads' peers from a different department. He told me straight up off the record, I'm not going to identify who he was, but he told me that enforcement is not possible, or enforcement is not a priority, or enforcement is not capable of being done. So I see these laws coming out, and one of the practical problems is, can it be enforced or not? Because honestly, that two-stroke moped thing with the noise and all that, if the police had implemented strict enforcement, which we encouraged as members of the moped community, as the owner of a shop over these years, was pull these guys over, give them tickets, and they're done.
I need you to explain something to me, though, because I'm not a moped person. I'm a mechanical person. When you guys talk about two strokes,
two-stroke is that loud modified mopeds that are obsolete, that are polluting to the atmosphere and no longer around. Mr. Rhoads knows
illegal already.
They're already outlawed in most areas of the United States. In California, you can't get one.
Okay, so just excuse me for constantly interrupting you. I'm sorry, but because you're very knowledgeable and I appreciate it, but I also want to make sure that we stay on track for the viewers.
That's not a problem.
So these two strokes, I don't want to get off our topic too far, but you've got these mopeds that are really loud and really illegal.
They're no longer around as much.
Well, I hear them all the time. Well, they're out there. So, I mean, what is the mechanism for enforcing that?
Like I said earlier, if HPD had the manpower 10 years ago, 11 years ago, if they had pulled over all these two-stroke mopeds, our moped shop would have been glad to help them identify such things. But there was never a organized, concerted, consistent, and long-term effort in order to pull them over. If they'd been able to do that 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't have these two-stroke mopeds now. As a safety inspection station, I get them off the road, But if they're still out there and they're beyond my jurisdiction, it's kind of like having a gun and you're a gun shop and you have people who are law-abiding citizens who have a gun that's registered, then you have criminals who go out and get guns with no numbers on them. It's kind of like that. We have no jurisdiction over those mopeds. So these two-stroke loud mopeds that you bring up are being replaced by high-powered silent dirt bikes. A lot of these two-stroke peoples are abandoning them and trading them in and getting into this new
That's
thing.
what I'm seeing, yeah. Okay, so
Well,
Senator Rhoads.
I mean, the enforcement of it is, you know, they enforce. I mean, look, on Oahu, the police department is short 456 positions.
I understand that.
So yeah, that's an underlying problem. But they'll enforce it just like they enforce every other law. And of course, they do click it in tickets. They get special money to. It's the same sort of safety enforcement kind of thing that they do. So they're perfectly capable of enforcing it. In fact, I would say mopeds, the fact that we made it all across the board makes it quite a lot easier to enforce, because it's not like, okay, I have to stop you and figure out whether you're 15 or not, or I'm sorry, whatever it was before, 18.
Right.
You're just,
it is
it's
easier
just
to
automatic.
enforce.
So I think it's quite a lot easier to enforce.
I think from an injury prevention standpoint, whether it's enforced or not enforced, it's like a speed limit. So you have the opportunity to go the speed limit or not. You're not going to get pulled over every time you're going over the speed limit. I'm guilty of that, right? But it's there as a deterrent. So it deters. People know, oh, there's a law. I need to make sure I wear my helmet. And if I don't, there's a consequence for it. The reality is we know, and it's proven, and I'd love to see your helmets that you brought with you, because I think that's the important thing, is we know that up to 88% of the time when they're wearing a helmet, that it reduces a severe TBI. And what that does is that ensures that individual stays healthy, they're able to contribute to society, continue to contribute for their family, continue to work, do all those things, live a healthy life, where those individuals that don't wear a helmet end up in a state where they may be a burden to their family, they may not be able to ever get the rehab or the care that they need, because that's another issue that we have here within Hawaii, is we don't have really strong pockets of severe traumatic brain injury recovery process.
You know, I just to move on to some of our viewer questions that are hitting these points, I want to share the viewer's point of view. Someone commenting on YouTube, I don't even know how they do that. The riders who are against helmet laws think they'll never be the one to have an accident that results in a traumatic brain injury. They don't consider their ohana and the other loved ones who might rely on them. I mean, I think that's a fair comment. I mean, you've probably known guys who were injured on mopeds that their lives were changed forever, weren't they?
I've known people who have been injured in mopeds, cars, motorcycles, bicycles, pedestrians, and all their lives have been changed to a certain extent. Some people shrug it off, some people don't. But basically what it comes down to is that I am for using helmets. I just think that the law is overreaching and it could have been introduced with more subtlety and nuance. Now, what happened was there was talk in the legislation over the 5-month period, this bill SB 30, which is now ACT Act 222, which is moped helmets for everybody in Hawaii. There was talk of making it for 21-year-olds and all that. But apparently that was not implemented. It was just dropped in across the board. So I'm not saying that I'm against helmets. I personally use one, and I think it's the person's choice to do it. It's just like getting into a car and using your seatbelt or not. You know, you run the risk of doing that. If you get pulled over and you get deterred, great. If you don't, and you get into an accident and you get hurt worse because your car, you didn't have your seatbelt on, that's on you.
Just to mix things up again, I'm going to go back to skateboards because I've got a couple questions about them. And this is something we were kind of joking about a little bit earlier when we talked about the skateboarders on the video, that, you know, they get hassled. They feel like they're getting hassled by the police on a kind of a regular basis. And it says, I am opposed to any law, this is Chad, downtown, I'm opposed to any law that increases interaction of police with skateboarders. As a skater, I feel like police already target us. This gives them another excuse. Is that a concern for you, Senator, at all?
I mean, I don't have any, I have no data on the topic of whether the police are targeting them for anything. I mean, I know that there's a lot of skateboarders, particularly in Ala Park. I've never actually seen a police officer talk to any of them, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I'm not there 24/7.
I think that with skateboarders, it tends to be that they're skating someplace they may not supposed to be, or they're playing on public property with their skateboards.
Yeah, I just have no idea.
And this is a question for the health department, Garrett. Except for this show, how are parents going to know about the new helmet rules for their kids? Is public outreach planned? Is that something that the health department's going to have to do?
So we do have an injury prevention and outreach department that focuses on this specifically. So yes, we outreach to the public to the best of our ability. Obviously, outreach and initiatives require funding. And so when we have these things, we have to look at what's been put into place, what funding we have, and then we prioritize those. And so we work very frequently with the Keiki Children's Coalition at Kapolani and other places so that they constantly are educating on the use of helmets. So I anticipate that even if it's not the Department of Health doing it, it'll be one of our coalition members and partners assisting us in that education, because we don't have an endless pot of gold where we can educate on every possible injury that's out there, but we will do our part.
You know, this is a sad story from Laura and Gary in Wahiawa. Our nephew died in 1999 after falling off a skateboard. It puts it in a different perspective when you've lost a loved one who has a traumatic brain injury and dies. We see kids on mopeds going well over 30 miles per hour and doing wheelies all the time. It's very concerning. Actually, I don't think those are mopeds. It's hard to do a wheelie on a moped.
No. Mopeds go 30 miles an hour. And if she's trying to bring the moped community into that, I'll be honest with you, I was one of the few moped shops that went down and helped come up with some of the
rules,
standards for the safety inspection system. So I've always been against loud mopeds personally. Now people might want to say that the shops are the ones that are the bad guys, whatever. To me, that's irrelevant, because as a safety inspection station, we're part of the front line of defense in enforcing noise ordinance for mopeds.
So go ahead.
I would just say I'm really sorry to hear that. I mean, fortunately, that's actual deaths from skateboard injuries don't happen very often, but
and apparently not from moped accidents very often either.
No, and that's a good thing. That's the whole point. I don't want people to die. That's why.
But a traumatic brain injury also has a public policy issue too, right?
So from a public health and just a community health and safety standpoint, we know that even these brain injuries that take place, and we're learning more as science evolves, but as an individual ages, it then puts them at risk for accelerated brain injury and aging. It puts them at risk for dementia and other things like CTE that we're learning more about that cause depression and cause a whole other cascading list of comorbid complications such as obesity all the way to hyperthyroidism. There's tons that we're learning now. When you have a concussion or traumatic brain injury at a young age, what are the long-term implications of those as you age? And then it puts an additional burden on the public health system from that standpoint too.
Okay, so back to mopeds, which are now taking back over our questioning. Actually, a decent question for Garrett Hall from the health department. Have you guys been trying to get helmet laws for motorcycles? Has it been something you've advocated for? I mean, I know you just came recently.
I've recently been, but I will say the Injury Prevention Coalition has been active in outreach for helmet protection, because they understand how it does make a difference and it saves people's lives in the long term. So overall, there are coalitions across the state that have been advocating for helmets, in particular helmets for children, because of the long-term impacts that it may have on our keiki. And so that's an ongoing initiative that's always out there.
You know, Bob, I know that you brought your the helmets to show people, and I invited you to show us earlier, thinking that you were bringing it in order to show people.
Actually, yeah, I can't have given an opportunity. I can go ahead and show you the types of helmets out there.
What is this going to mean for riders?
Basically, there are three types of basic helmets out there. These are all DOT approved. You want a federal DOT approved helmet, Department of Transportation, because that's the standard that you want to go by in order to ensure that you get the maximum safety possible. This is a typical half bowl helmet. This covers your brain pan. It's your most essential area. It protects your head, the most essential area that you need to. This is very much favored by a lot of people simply because it's lightweight, compact, easy to put into your moped, and provides basic essential protection.
How much does it cost?
Usually they range from probably about 40, low of 40 to a high of about $75. And then you have the next one up. This one here is a 3/4 helmet. It covers most of your faces. I prefer the ladies to wear them because it'll protect their pretty faces, which is way prettier than mine, and it'll keep them from getting ugly. So, but the thing is that this one, everybody, I'm from the 80s. I'm old. Okay, so anyway, this helmet provides some more protection on the side and allows you to suffer less facial injuries to your maxillocranial area in your jaw. And then last but not least, this is the one I personally use. This is a full face helmet. This is obviously going to give you the maximum protection. The problem isn't the fact that helmets are a panacea and a silver bullet to be able to fix all injuries. The problem is, one, the person's awareness of where they are, and are they using their helmet properly? That's the biggest issue I have, is that, oh yeah, everybody's wearing a helmet. We solved the problem. That's not necessarily the case. If we're gonna wear a helmet, you want the person to be able to use the helmet properly and know how to use it, strap it on properly, and understand that there are drawbacks to certain helmets. This one provides the most protection, but it reduces your peripheral vision by a good 20%. So if you don't use your head and move and look everywhere where you're going and adjust your personal usage of that helmet to optimize in that situation, it may be just as dangerous as not having a helmet. Does that make sense? So you have to be able to not only know which helmets to use for whatever reason. This is lighter, more compact, and it allows you to enjoy Hawaii's beautiful sunlight. This has maximum protection, but they all have a trade-off. You can have a little bit less hearing on this one also. So you have to really be aware of your hearing, because your moped, your sound could be loud, what have you, horns going off, sirens going off all the time, things like that. But also, you have to also be aware that there's certain things that happen with certain accidents. Now, I don't know what Garrett's information is on neck injuries, but our owner and president is actually a motorcycle rider of 30, 40 years. And he recommended that if you're gonna wear a helmet, you pick one, probably not a full face. I wear full face because I try to maintain the knowledge that I have as a rider and as a moped rider, and to use it in conjunction with the helmet. And what happens is there have been reported cases of, you can break your neck with one of these, possibly, if you're at the wrong angle. That can happen, unfortunately, depending on the kind of accident.
Very interesting presentation.
So,
thank you. No, hold on. I need to stop you now so I can move along to some of my questions. If you want to make one more point about the helmets, I appreciate that.
I am for helmets. I just think that this law is overreaching.
Okay. This is a really interesting question because it affects a lot of institutions, not just colleges. It says, and it reminds me that for a while some of the schools were trying to ban electric bikes for a little while. This question is, hundreds, if not thousands, of college students at UH and on campuses drive mopeds. Some wear helmets, some don't. Would the university be required to mandate helmet use to comply with the law, which could make things complicated and expensive for students? You guys don't have that in the law.
No more than any other pedestrian or bicycle, any other traffic law. I mean, universities and colleges have roads that go through their campuses, and that's subject to the regular rules. So,
is that a concern that you might have, that institutions?
Is that an e-bicycle you're talking about, Garrett?
No, this is mopeds.
I mean, sorry,
of course, yeah.
Mopeds. That's why I believe that if the law had been raised from 18 to 21, you could automatically address any UH student pretty much, except maybe much older graduate students and things like that. 90% of students would be covered if been simply raised to 21.
Okay. All right. So apparently seatbelts were required by the feds, but threatening to withhold highway funding from states that did not pass such laws. I believe they should do the same for helmets. Bob Norwood. Is there anything like that, Garrett Hall, out there, that safety rules coming down from the feds that would actually force some of these things?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not in this administration.
You said what I was going to say. But...
Okay. I think people should be safe and wear helmets. That's what they're designed for. Curious about mopeds in bike lanes. Why is that allowed? Is that allowed?
Yes, it is in most areas except a couple of niche areas. I believe that The problem with the inconsistent laws they have about that is it causes confusions for moped people on knowing where to ride or not to ride, especially new moped riders like students at UH who are not familiar with the moped routes where mopeds are allowed in bicycle lanes. I'm actually for mopeds being allowed in bicycle range. Mopeds should be allowed in bicycle lanes with speed limits.
I think, though, it's an interesting question. I mean, and now that Garrett and Senator Rhoads are involved in this discussion, we've got all these bike lanes we've got different kinds of bike lanes in different places. Some of them are not very wide and expect people to go in two directions. Is there any effort to standardize this and make things, less confusing for something like that? Mopeds and bike lanes, to me, why would they be in a bike lane?
Well, mopeds used to be motorized bicycles, pretty much.
Yeah, but now they're not.
Well, the first point I would make is that all streets aren't the same either. So if you're looking for standardization, we don't have it. I mean, Baratania is different than King, is different than Akepo Lane, whatever we're going with that. But no, I think the future of transportation is more multifaceted. You're gonna have everything. You're gonna have e-bikes, you're gonna have mopeds, you're gonna have motorcycles, you're gonna have bicycles, you're gonna have pedestrians, you're gonna have cars. And it used to be a long time ago, and the cars, it wasn't expected that cars would dominate streets. Everyone was on the streets. Back then, of course, you had horse-drawn carriages and people riding horses and stuff. But I think what we do need to go back to, and I think it's actually better in urban areas at least, having a multiplicity of ways to move around is better. But the uncertainty can be a good thing because it means people pay more attention. I was in Vietnam a few years ago. There's no bike lanes, there's no sidewalks, everybody's on the road. But people, I'm sure their traffic fatality rates are way higher, but I did notice anecdotally that the driver of the vehicle we were in looked for everything. And I think we need to do more of that. We need to look out for mopeds, we need to look out for motorcycles, we need to look out for pedestrians. The road is not just for cars.
It goes back to situational
awareness. I
awareness.
agree with Senator Rhoads on situational awareness is key.
And it has to be that way because distracted movement, whatever it is, I've seen it just on your phone, on a moped, or on a bike, or in a car. That is a huge problem.
But it's usually the mopeds, it's everybody but the cars that pay the price. I mean, you hear about pedestrians that cross against a light or something. The person who hits them, even if they're right, it doesn't matter whether the pedestrian is right or wrong. If they get hit by a car, they're the ones who lose.
Here's an interesting question. I believe that years ago there was a program where the school system provided helmets for bike riders. I don't remember that. I remember they would.
So there still is a current program. Now, I'm not with the Department of Education, but I know there still is a program where they teach safe riding skills at a certain specific age group. I don't know if it's like 4th grade or when everyone goes out.
It's like a bicycle association.
Correct.
Or something.
And that is still an active program, to my knowledge, that is in place, and they do teach helmet safety too.
I don't think we're going to get much further with the helmet question. I did get one question about with these helmets. If you have an accident with one of these helmets, here's the question: are these helmets able to protect for multiple impacts, or are they one impact and done? Also, if the helmet doesn't sustain an impact, does the foam have a limited lifespan? Someone wants to buy a helmet.
Is this about mopeds or
just helmets?
Helmets.
Imagine the ones you were showing.
Well, you would have to understand the DOT standards from top to bottom to know that. I do know that the DOT standards is basically a standard level of modicum of protection that allows you to have an increased chance of survival and less chance of traumatic brain injury. Now, if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, I would recommend that person Google that and check that particular technical data out because honestly, when you have an accident, the situation is completely chaotic and you have no idea. It can be 0 to 100. You don't know. So that question actually is very difficult to answer. It's a very good question. However, it's not something that can have one clear-cut, easy answer.
Let me ask, though, is there anything in the law that says what quality of helmet you have to have?
Yeah, it does mention, well, for the...
Because I know when I buy my bicycle helmets, there is ratings and stuff like that.
Right, there is a requirement.
So can you just wear a bicycle helmet if you're a moped rider?
No.
I think this is a tricky this is a tricky situation. Being a nurse and an advocate and understanding that helmets are expensive, and the recommendation in most cases, if a helmet is involved in an accident, then it shouldn't be used again. However, the reality is not everyone can afford it. And if it's a low impact, potentially I personally would rather have a person wearing a helmet than not having one. But I don't advocate against what the policy is, because a helmet only works if it hasn't been used or used in a previous injury. Like, it's just like there's other injury protection devices out there. Once you've used it, you really should dispose of it and get a new one.
You were saying
Yeah, so for the skateboards at least, and I believe it's true of the other bill as well, for the moped bill, but it's designed to fit the user, it's designed to protect against head trauma, and it's been tested by a nationally recognized agency. So yes, there are requirements in the skateboard one.
And there's safety stickers on each of them that tell you if you were in an accident, here's the parameters for this helmet.
But in terms of, again, like, I wear a bicycle helmet when I'm riding my bicycle. I go 30, 35 miles an hour sometimes on my bicycle.
So your bicycle's faster than a moped, actually.
Well, going
mopeds are
downhill
limited
on
to 30
Kilo
miles
Drive is pretty fast.
Your bicycle's actually faster than a moped, then.
Yeah, no, I think it is. It's a road bike, yeah, so I could go fairly fast.
Right.
Is the speed of a moped and a legal, we're talking about legal mopeds, I think that the public does get them mixed up because they see people zipping by on these illegal mopeds.
Well,
Is it limited?
Scooters too, right?
Well, you like to bring up the illegal moped thing a number of different times there, Daryl. And the thing is that they are out there, and they will always be out there. But then there's new issues like the dirt bikes that go 60 miles an hour and they're silent. I consider them more deadly because you can't hear them coming. Now, I know it's annoying, but I'd rather be annoyed than some kid who smacks into the side of my pickup truck and he's bleeding to death and because I couldn't hear him coming. So if it's a choice between the two lesser of two evils, I would rather pick a loud moped that I know is coming rather than some silent but deadly guy. And the thing is that mopeds have licensing. Even when they're in the old days, it was bicycles. These dirt bikes, they have nothing. They have nothing. They don't have any kind of registration, nothing. They're supposed to be for off-road and they're being used. The only good thing is that these moped riders are leaving the moped scene, leaving us alone, and jumping onto these e-bikes. So what's happening is that we're getting rid of this outlaw element from our community, which I don't have a problem with. And as a moped safety inspector, like I said, my job is to prevent that kind of thing. And I think we've done a good job over the last 15 years. Will we ever get rid of them completely? No. Will they wake you up at night sometimes? Probably yes. But you know what? It's better that you know they're there than you don't know they're there when it matters in like an accident.
No, I think that's a fair point. And don't mean to sound like I'm arguing with you. I'm just sort of like, I'm just trying to reflect what I think is a public perception. And when it comes to the kinds of vehicles we're talking about, it is important to make distinctions between these different vehicles. And that's what I'm trying to do, is make a distinction between these different vehicles.
So I think that there's a lot of people who don't make distinctions between all the different kinds of vehicles, and some of them are very understandable because they're not all that different if you're just looking at them.
Right.
And I think one reason the e-bike bill, there was an e-bike bill, as I think you're all aware, that was vetoed, and part of it was a definitional issue, is my understanding, because it wasn't written quite carefully enough to exclude something fairly obvious. It should have been excluded. I forget exactly the details. But yeah, a lot of people blame mopeds for stuff that isn't a moped at all under the legal.
No, they have scooters that can go 60 miles an hour. They're basically automatic motorcycles. All you have to do is look at the license plate. If it's a white license plate, it's a motorcycle or scooter. If it's a yellow license plate, it's a moped. Most people don't know that, though.
Well, yeah, and so again, for the purpose of our discussion and trying to write legislation, you have to make these distinctions, but...
And then every year somebody comes up with some new gadget that you can cruise around on, So I've seen guys go down Baratania Street on these like motorized unicycles.
That are super fast.
They're super fast.
Yeah.
So where does that fit into the current legal paradigm? I don't know.
Well, and then there's these little two-wheeled scooters that are electric now, too, that go super fast. Yeah. I mean, at some point, don't you think that you just have to say something that can go X speed should require a helmet?
It would be a lot simpler legally and for everybody just dealing with it in real life.
Do you feel that way too?
Well, you were talking earlier about why should mopeds be allowed in bike lanes? Well, first of all, if you're a moped rider, you have to have a driver's license, okay? You have to have a driver's license. You have to have training, okay? You have to have a registered motor vehicle. Now, that's more requirements than a bicycle does. if you're riding one of those zippy little electric scooters, which a lot of them go into the bicycle lanes, they don't have any license, they don't have any registration, they don't have anything. Anybody can jump on one of those things. So you have two different classes of drivers here. You have one class of riders who have legal burdens on them already that require that they abide by the law to a certain extent in order to be part of the roadside community, whereas there's a huge market of new people who are just jumping in completely unregulated. So when it comes down to it, I think that
Yeah, except that they're still required to obey the law.
they're required to obey the law, but they don't have that baseline responsibility that makes them have more of a tendency to obey the law.
I mean, I certainly see bicyclists heading, that aren't licensed, driving up Baratania at night against the one-way traffic with no lights on them.
E-bikes or
Just a bike,
Bicycle.
just a regular old bike, and it's that's crazy, and it's illegal, and they could be cited for it,
dangerous.
whether they have a license or not.
So I want to go back to your point, though. To me, and I will just say this as a trauma nurse and an injury prevention specialist, I do think we need to look at the science and velocity, because we know the human body over a certain amount of speed cannot sustain, and it does cause injury. Now, do I know what that number is right now? No, I don't know. But I do think that there is a way that it could be more universal in regards to helmets, so it doesn't too much to Robert's point that that one group, one population is being signaled out to. I think it makes more logic to say if your vehicle can go over X amount of speed, their velocity, you're at higher risk of causing harm to not only yourself, but to others. Those bikes go really fast, and someone walking, and I've seen them almost collide with people, or walking with the motorized bicycles just swarming around the sidewalk.
I completely agree with Garrett on that. My statistics from the Department of Transportation prove that the number of deaths on motorcycles are way higher than mopeds, and I think that if moped people have to wear helmets, I think it's only fair that motorcycle people wear them too.
Well, yeah, and I don't think that you've got any disagreement on this table about that. I think that Mr. Sato, this is a viewer named Nathan, I think Mr. Sato makes a good point about overreach by the government. In addition to situational awareness, the city and even the state should have mandatory safety classes within the school system about awareness on public roads and vehicles, et cetera. Important as math tables and reading. But also, we haven't talked about the role of parents in this whole process. I've seen kids on these bikes, the electric bikes, going very fast.
Electric bikes
in big
are not
groups.
mopeds, sir.
I know they're not. And I don't mean to be accusing you of doing anything wrong, but I'm just saying that there are classes of riders, along with classes of vehicles, that should not be doing what they're doing. I'm not saying it's moped riders, but this idea about look at the speed that they're capable of and regulate it based on that. How, from your expertise.
Well, I brought it up earlier that my class of people are licensed drivers. You have to have a driver's license. Like, there's a lot of people who may have this misconstrued idea that you don't need anything to drive a moped. In certain states on the mainland, yes, because unfortunately, unlike motorcycles, which there's one universal standard for all 50 states pretty much, mopeds are a patchwork of different standards in different states. And the Hawaii standard is you need a driver's license, and you need to have a driver's license, and you have to be a certain age, and you have to pass the driver's license test in order to drive one. That's way different from e-bicycles, which I believe there were 3 classes, right, Senator Rhoads, they were going to introduce?
I don't remember. It was a very confusing bill.
Okay. But anyway, they're trying to make it so that certain classes of e-bicycles, you don't need a driver's license.
Right.
So you have 2 different levels of responsibility. One has registered legal responsibility that has to pass a minimum safety standard in order to get their licensing. And then you have another group that is currently unregulated as far as I know.
Let me ask a quick question, and maybe this is a dumb question. What's the rule for bicycles and helmets now? I think it's if you're a kid, you have to wear one.
I believe, is it 18 or 21?
But there's no requirement that I wear.
Somebody to Google that?
Like Robert is saying, I mean, I could go 40 miles an hour on my bicycle, and I don't have to wear a helmet. But it's not powered by anything. That's what I'm going downhill.
When I was growing up and I rode a bike all over the place, no one knew what no one knew what a bike helmet was, right? So
You're dating yourself at this point.
No, I am totally. I was, I came of age in 1979 or something.
One thing I'd like Garrett to do to sort of wrap us up here. You're the person that has had your hands on people who have suffered these kinds of injuries. What's it like for them, for their families, and for you?
So as a trauma nurse and having lived this experience and having to care for children that come into the emergency room or even adults that have it, it takes a toll. You have to learn as an individual, as a nurse, you have to learn how to be able to handle these things and seek help and seek your relief point however you can. But the bigger thing is the family members aren't prepared. And I see a tremendous, especially when it comes to children, a tremendous amount of guilt, shame, and they thought they were buying their kid or their young child a toy to entertain themselves or a mode of getting around that was supposed to be fun and entertainment without realizing that now they have a child that's brain dead and they totally have changed their life and they're intubated and they're going to have to take them home on a ventilator for the rest of their life. Like, these things happen. I've seen this happen. So it changes whole families' lives. It changes people's futures. And so the simple thing is, and I think like we all said, we agree helmets are important. I think across the board, you know, if you have a helmet on, you're 88% less likely to be in that situation. And our brain is one of the most, I mean, with brain injury, the recovery, we don't even know some of the outcomes that come from brain injury. So ultimately, I think, do what's best, I think, for yourself and wear helmets.
Thank you so much. That has to wrap us up at that point. Mahalo to all of you for joining us tonight. And we thank our guests, Senator Karl Rhoads and Garrett Hall, the State Trauma Program Manager, and the owner of Moped Doctors, Robert Sato. Next week on Insights on PBS Hawaii, we examine the next steps for Hawaiian homelands. After receiving a large bump in funding, has DHHL made any progress in getting people off the waiting list and into homes? Join the conversation next week. For Insights on PBS Hawaii, I'm Daryl Huff. Aloha.
Local broadcasts of Insights on PBS Hawaiʻi are made possible by the support of viewers like you. Mahalo, and by Carl Smith Ball, providing legal services throughout Hawaii and